Thank you all for taking the time to come to our panel today. We're particularly excited about this topic. If you've had a chance to already go through the trade show floor, or you haven't yet, we've been working on a wrestling video game for about 3.5 years titled Wrestle Quest. So the big focus of this panel and some of the takeaways, it's really us sharing our passion for the two things we love most with wrestling and video games, and hoping that you leave with some new wrestling games to try out, and maybe just a little bit sweatier than you normally would be on a Friday morning. So I'm James, the founder of MegaCat Studios.
My name is Patrick Hickey Jr. I am the author of the Minds Behind the Games book series. I'm also, can I say, the primary voice actor on Wrestle Quest?
The voice of Wrestle Quest, for sure.
Let me tell you something about Wrestle Quest. Oh, yeah, can you dig it?
So, part historian, part voice actor, so that's me.
I'm Zach. I'm the head of narrative at MegaCat Studios, and I did the writing and design on Wrestle Quest. I'm something of a method writer, so I've been practicing my pro wrestling moves for the past 4 years, powerbombing my kids to sleep every night.
And I'm the biggest mark up here. Yeah. Y'all ready to have a little fun today? Can you hear us through the mask? Seriously, I'm just making sure. Okay. All right, James, and before he starts into this presentation, I just want everybody, this is so typical of pro wrestling that when you go to conventions nowadays, you see like a picture of Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart from 1984, and then he shows up. Folks, look at James's picture right here up on the screen.
Wait.
It's his college graduation shot. So I'm just calling him on that right out. Go ahead, James.
All my other photos, I have a mask on. So we're not going to spend too much time here, but this is Wrestle Quest. So the origin of the product for us was we've always wanted to make a wrestling game, and we wanted to make something that was unique, that captured the essence of what inspired us to eventually follow in these footsteps to be part of the games industry and to bring this game to life. So it's taken a lot of time, even prior to those 3.5 years, to conceptualize.
So Wrestle Quest is the world's first RPG that features pro wrestling. And with us, we're harkening back to this classic era of wrestling, the 80s and 90s, and also this classic era of RPGs with, there's a lot of Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, Super Mario RPG, Earthbound drew a lot of inspiration from those. And I personally love the turn-based battle system from those games, but what we really wanted to do was take that and then, improve some of the pain points, make the battles more engaging, more interactive by adding a pro wrestling flair on everything. So there's a lot of pro wrestling systems in Wrestle Quest all over the place, not just combat, but everywhere.
Oh, yeah!
Yeah.
And then just capturing all of these amazing wrestling games that have come before us and kind of the most inspiring features and sub-features of each has been a huge part of this journey and what inspired us to eventually take our many pages of notes and put them into a panel.
So part of the Wrestle Quest experience is that we have these real-world legends in the game. Obviously Macho Man, Jeff Jarrett are there, and within the game world, they appear as these statues, and they're more like monuments or shrines to these wrestlers where you can go to, and each wrestler has their own special side quest where you complete that side quest and you get some of the game's best loot, or maybe even some cool things like you can summon them into battle. So, in Final Fantasy, you might be able to summon a dragon, Bahamut, or whatever, but only Wrestle Quest lets you summon Jake the Snake to rip a DDT on your enemies.
Which is really important.
Of course.
So on the headline side, 1983, that was the beginning of the intersection of wrestling and video games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, have you guys ever played tag team wrestling before in the arcade on the NES? It laid the foundation for the gameplay structure, the gameplay formula that many of the games that followed for the next 4 or 5 years would be based on. So hasn't aged particularly well, but without it, you wouldn't have many of the wrestling games that we play today. So it's an important, papa to the games that we love today.
And so much of that is the technical limitations in that era.
Yes.
Things like these scanline limitations and size of sprites, but 300 plus total wrestling video games. So even the most hardcore wrestling fans are usually able to tick off 20 or 30, but there's over 300 wrestling video games that have been created So if you ever want to find a new way to spend your work week vacation on, I think this is one to consider.
Absolutely. I mean, every wrestler that you could ever think of that's been on TV at some point, they've found their way into some type of wrestling game. And then think about all of your favorite games that you play now online that are modded. People are just putting them in, you know? So it's like back in the day, you had to be placed in the game by a developer. Now it's just like somebody likes you, they're going to put you in a modded version of Revenge or No Mercy or something like that. It's a great time. It's a great time for games.
And we actually had a great photo of this, and it was Pat doing a Scrooge McDuck thing in a pile of cartridges, but we ended up losing it the way in.
Yeah.
So 20 plus gaming consoles, so you can play wrestling games through the entire era from Gen 1 to today across a number of different, I want to say, interesting slices and genre bends.
Yeah, I mean, some of the worst received game consoles of all time have wrestling games on it. You know, I mean, I wish there was a wrestling game for Virtual Boy because I'd play it even though I'd probably go blind. You know, but I mean, there were even Tiger Electronics WWE games. You know, so just like wherever video games have gone, wrestling has gone. It's just they're synonymous with one another.
So 12 licensed promotions. Definitely something not to sniff at. So it's not just WWE, WCW, ECW, TNA. There's a number of promotions that have all had their own world in gaming.
Absolutely, and then you've got some wrestling games like WCW vs. the World, for instance, that has New Japan and All Japan, War, Michinoku Pro. They've even got MMA promotions in some of these games. So you're talking one game has 5 or 6 different promotions in it. And these are games that came out in 96, 97, 98. You know, some of you guys probably weren't even born yet. And they were totally ahead of the team. The people shaking their head know that they weren't born yet. I love you guys. You guys are great. We're old. But, you know, this talks about how people wanted something like, yeah, WWF game, great market and stuff, but if they could throw in as much content as possible and make it something really special and stand out. Wrestling games were the first to really just fill the cartridge with as much content as possible.
So over 2 billion copies of wrestling games combined have sold. I like to think everybody in this room had a big impact on that, but it's a pretty deep sea of suplexes at this point.
Sure.
So 15 plus genre-bending spinoffs. So we won't go too deep on this too, but it's how wrestling has influenced so many genres, starting with arcade fighters and strategy to, you know, literally every genre that existed has had some type of wrestling component.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this last night. Like, you guys remember when Twisted Metal was like a big thing? I missed that genre. That was a super fun genre. But like WWE Crush Hour, do you guys remember that game? That was actually, yeah, there we go, some Crush Hour people back there. That was a lot of fun, and it was basically Twisted Metal with WWE characters. Rob Van Dam's car was awesome. Remember that? You know, but that game wouldn't have worked without the personalities of the performers. You know, so again, wrestling, personality, you know, the licensing of each really cool character playing a role, it's so interconnected to video games.
And it's not just, you know, the big 3 or 4 folks. It's, you know, every single era of gaming has had flagship game companies see and recognize the value of wrestling and where it's going to move game cartridges and digital downloads. So it's not just your Nintendo's, THQs, but it's everyone who has helped build and transform the industry have all taken part in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Squaresoft made 3 wrestling games on PS2. I'm not sure if you guys knew that. They're Japanese imports, but the first NES WWF game, do you guys know who developed it? Come on. Go ahead. Come on. No, Rare. Rare. So we're talking Donkey Kong Country, we're talking Conquer. They made the first console, like NES WWF game, you know? So the veins of the wrestling DNA, they run deep into gaming. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
And you can't see this, but we have a friend in the second row that's sitting on a pile of Steel Cage Challenge Game Boy cartridges. He looks uneasy, but it's working out. And our source material here, I'd love to bring your attention to a book that was kickstarted fairly recently. It's called Wrestling with Pixels, and it features bios on our over 300 of these games. It's really great, quick pickup, grab it on Amazon. Then I wanted to add some other source material here, and I very vividly remember leafing through my Sega and GamePro and everything else magazines and seeing these 2 loves of my life jump off the page and fill my Christmas wish list.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I miss those days like in comic books where you would open up a comic book and you would see an ad for a video game and things like that. Those just sold the game. Like you're reading stories of larger than life characters to only see ads of wrestling personalities who are indeed themselves larger than life characters as well, you know? So, yeah, pop culture, wrestling, totally intertwined with one another.
And before we dive into individual case studies and kind of like broad DNA, what we realized when we first started our Wrestle Quest search, maybe our Wrestle Quest was that in many cases our kind of source material of what really resonated with us wasn't always the wrestling matches. So for many of us, our first 3 or 4 memories as a child being introduced to wrestling came through action figures and video games, and the matches came several years later. So I don't know if that's something we all share, but I'd love to get a quick raise of a hand if you remember action figures and wrestling games as your introduction to the sport that we probably love still. My people. So storytelling and wrestling, it's something we wanted to capture in our game, and it's because it's literally our favorite single element of what makes wrestling great.
Yeah, wrestling isn't just about the action that happens in the ring. It's also about all the action that happens on the promos, on the mic, and then also outside of the ring, kind of, the behind-the-scenes machinations, the dramatic reveals, the betrayals, and the antagonism between stables and factions and whatnot. All of that is all part of the show. It's not just the action in the ring, and that's something we really wanted to capture with WrestleQuest. It's when we started analyzing the storytelling in wrestling, and then how much of that appears in JRPGs as well, it just kind of clicked that, like, wow, this should have been done before.
And Jeff, we talked a little bit about this during the Xbox showcase. So storytelling in wrestling compared to the 80s and 90s until now, you give me like a broad case study. There was just so much interesting passion pouring out in that last beat, and I just think it's essential to lay the foundation for that.
I'm just reading the tweet that's on the board about what does Shakespeare have in common with the WWE or professional wrestling. And Xavier Woods, everybody knows him, huge gamer and all that. He came to work for me in 2003, 4, 5. His real name's Austin Creed, and he went by Consequences Creed. But I feel very certain that he heard the quote that my grandmother taught me. I was breaking into the business in 1986, 87, 88, just a high school kid that played basketball and loved wrestling. And I would be interviewed by newspaper writers or radio disc jockeys, and they may not be a wrestling fan, and I would ask my dad, or really my grandmother, who was my mentor, I'm like, how do you answer the question when they say, what do you do, or what is professional wrestling? And it's like, I don't want to say we're up there in our bathing suits, grappling around, throwing each other around, play fighting. So I would, she's the one who taught me the quote that professional wrestling is Shakespeare to the masses. And that is something that is so true that no matter how good the action is in the ring, if it doesn't resonate emotionally and connect emotionally through storytelling, protagonists, antagonists, larger-than-life characters, but at the end of the day, it's good versus evil with a bunch of shades of gray in between, and all through the time, whether it's the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, into 2022, it really comes down to what is the story. If the story resonates, it's successful. If it doesn't resonate and connect emotionally with the audience, you're not going to have a successful professional wrestling game or television show or pay-per-view or big-time premium event. The essence of what wrestling is true. It's truly, I'll say this with all due respect for all the bumps and bruises we go through, it is very essence, it's truly a story.
Zach, I know you have a bit of a college wrestling background. So if that's wrestling entertainment, how would you describe college wrestling?
Boring. No.
Boring. Just a pile of meat and hair rolling around, basically.
Yeah. And that can be its own game. It'll just be a shorter gameplay session.
Oh, man.
So we're going to spend some time here and kind of camp out on this slide, because this is the foundation of everything we're going to go through with the individual case studies. So the storytelling of gaming and the storytelling in wrestling go hand in hand. We just gave you a brief on that. And the characters themselves, if I think about my most fond memories of the actual main events of pay-per-views growing up, that I'm now able to rewatch on YouTube and on Peacock, is that right?
Yeah, Peacock, yeah.
And it's like it's actually the culmination of these stories, these sizzles and promos and all the behind the scenes that build up to these crazy matches. And that's the same type of amplification and ramp up that we fall in love with in games.
Absolutely. I mean, think about every RPG that you've ever played. If there's an unconvincing main character or a main character that you don't particularly care for, do you continue to play the game? It's a hard sell. But when you have a character that you can root for, that you have a character that you are attracted to mentally, physically, whatever, you continue to play the game. I mean, I can replay Final Fantasy VII a million times, and I know Aerith is going to die, but I still play it because it's just like that moment. It just makes you feel. The first time it happened, I was 14, and I remember it happening, and I'm like, no, and I saw him coming down. And I'm just like, oh my God. And it's just like, it's one of those things you can't take away, you know? And it's just like, to make a wrestling reference, you guys remember when you would knock somebody out in like Revenge or No Mercy and they do that little, like that? Like, that is
Can you
like,
do that
that's
again?
storytelling. You hit the guy with like a Stan Hansen.
Pat, can you do that again?
That's exactly what happened, man. Like, Vader would like punch a guy in the face.
All right, one more time.
Like that, you know? And it just made you feel amazing. It was like, I did that, you know? So you need that in video games. You need to be connected to the strengths and weaknesses of the characters. Like, every great video game is really like a coming of age tale, you know? And it's the same way in professional wrestling. We've watched Jeff from that high school kid playing basketball to the Bullet Club member, to the NWO member, to the leader at one time of the Four Horsemen.
There we go. There we go.
So, you know, it's a coming of age story. We believe in these characters and we grow and adapt with them. So video games and wrestling, they do the same thing that way.
And we don't have to make too much of a case about gaming being interactive art. I mean, in this era, we have art house games themselves. We have games that are both beautiful to work out and striking to experience. But wrestling itself is also an art form.
Yeah, it's not just about going out there, and Jeff, I'm sure you can speak to this, going out there and kind of doing what's planned. It's about going out there and kind of reacting to what the audience and feeding off what they're giving you and kind of responding to all that to give them what they want.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that is what keeps, candidly, some guys around longer than they should be. But it's that emotional connection that you have with the fan base, that you can take them on a journey and they're part of the journey, and the emotional feedback that you get. And, you know, whether, if it's a sporting event, you know, if you're in town and the Celtics are playing, they're the home team. Well, the home team in professional wrestling is the protagonist, and he gets to travel around and he feeds off that, whether it's John Cena or Stone Cold or Macho Man, you down there?
Oh, yeah.
It truly is that emotional connection, but with the fans rocking and rolling and getting engaged, that's what, to me, separates our form of entertainment from any other form of sport. You know, if you do a television show or a Hollywood blockbuster, you don't have that immediate, instant feedback where the fan feeds off of, and I don't get too far down, but what they've done, what we've done in this game to have that engagement and have the fan feedback, and it's candidly authentic to our industry and our trade and our craft. It really captures that emotion that a true wrestling match does.
Action and adrenaline's a pretty easy one, but I can think about our front row seats at the last AEW event, and it was like we had drank a pot of coffee after the way Zach was acting outside. But it's both gaming and wrestling both just fill you with this like absolute thriving moment.
It's
right?
amazing, yeah. Like seeing a live wrestling show, it's like a rock concert and an MMA match all together at the same time. It's like all those emotions plus like a play, like a Shakespearean play, all at the same time, and you can feel it. It's like lightning in your veins.
Like, you guys are gonna laugh that there was a huge thing in gaming to create the pause button, because a lot of game developers were like, we're trying to create an experience, and if you press a button and the player is allowed to stop and go to the bathroom or think, that's gonna ruin the entire experience. It's not necessarily true now, we know that, but it's like, come on, you're in a 75-note string in Guitar Hero, and you can press pause, it kind of changes the feeling, So there's definitely some of that going on in video games as well.
I love the idea of us removing pause buttons from all games.
Right?
And the exit.
Yep, and the exit, yeah.
It's a one-way path.
I just leave a ton of food right there.
You live here now.
And they both evolved forever in the 80s. So for most of us, that was the era of gaming that inspired us most, right? We grew up with the Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and I think wrestling absolutely evolved in the 80s, like going from territories and these compartmentalized regional factions to what Vince McMahon pioneered. I mean, it changed everything forever.
Yeah. Then that's, to me, when we were talking about 1983 was the first game that came out. Well, that's actually the year of the first Wrestlemania. And so, my father was a part of, we called it the territory system. It's pre-cable television where 22 regional promoters across North America had handshake agreements, and that's how they ran their industry on a television show on a local TV station. But when cable television came along and pay-per-view came along, also did gaming and licensing and everything that went with it. And that's sort of the very jumping off point, if you will, of the gaming industry. So wrestling has always mirrored pop culture, sometimes a little in front of it, sometimes a little back. This year at Wrestlemania, Bad Bunny, or that was last year, but Rob Gronkowski and you name it, Pat McAfee and all kinds of pop culture stars. But that's how our industry is. It's always mirrored pop culture, and the gaming industry really took off. And I used to love to get those checks from the video games, but because it just was a huge component of our industry dating back to the 80s.
So, Pat, we talk a little bit about gaming spectacle.
Yeah. You want to touch on the 80s, or you want to go straight there?
I really want to dig into the 80s on the next slides.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, spectacle in gaming, I mean, just think about it. Just like you do something in a game, and you want to be rewarded for it, right? So it's just like you went around in Street Fighter 2, and you don't get hit. What do you expect after that? What do you want to hear? It makes it worth it. That's a part of the spectacle. Can we hear that again? Perfect. I love it. But that's a part of ambiance and spectacle in video games. It's the same way like when the good guy comes out in wrestling, and you want to hear the crowd cheer. You want to hear that massive pop and stuff. So again, these two very seemingly different forms of pop culture are so similar to one another.
And it's the ebb and flow of like the reward of that spectacle, right? So
Yes.
after barely surviving and getting through and getting that transformative moment with massive feedback, it's like it all pays off.
Yeah, and pro wrestling with a spectacle, again, that's something that separates it from, college wrestling. It's these high-flying moves, acrobatic moves, these powerful moves. Like a powerbomb isn't practical, but it looks amazing, and you hear and feel that impact. And it's cool to see these guys that are like, larger-than-life people, these real-life action figures do these painful things to one another.
Is anything practical in professional wrestling? Anything. I want to.
Certainly not the outfits.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's next year's panel. It's like, and wrestling and gaming have the wildest super fans. So I remember the first, maybe second year, we were MegaCat. We were at PAX West. It was now like 6 years ago. And we were at PAX West, and we had our first 3 or 4 folks lined up. It was the first time we had folks waiting for us prior to setting up at an event ever. We're like, well, this is crazy. This is like the most interesting thing that's ever happened to us. Yeah. And it's like, as each trade show has continued, that's become a huge payoff for us. I think most of us probably enjoy those moments, sharing these games that we've sweat our tails off on for years, fulfilled by people experiencing them and celebrating them and then becoming super fans.
Yeah, you pour all this work and effort and really your heart and soul into these games, and then to share them with people and see them, their eyes get wide at the moments you've created. It's really, it's a wonderful feeling.
Jeff, have you ever experienced any wrestling super fans?
Oh. I thought you were about to ask me, where's the strangest place you've ever signed an autograph? We won't go there, but no. A quick story about conventions. Has anybody in here been to a WrestleMania Access? So when James sort of lined up that I was coming to PAX East, there's a huge convention going on over in Manchester, England, and they're all over literally the country now. There's actually going to be one in Mexico coming up, but I wasn't real sure kind of what to expect as far as the super fan and the engagement and the knowledge of everything, because this is my first PAX. And so I got here early yesterday. I came in Wednesday night, and yesterday morning before the doors opened, I walked around and saw all the big queues, the lines of everybody, and saw some of the cosplay and the dressed up. And we got Mick Foley on the front row down here, and we got. but it to me, in a lot of ways, it crystallized just what the massive crossover is because I've obviously by trade done hundreds, if not thousands, of wrestling-specific, whatever it is, autograph sessions, conventions, and all that, and a bunch of Comic-Cons as well, but never a gaming conference. And to see the crossover, the fan base, and then work in the booth and being a part of the booth and listen to the feedback and everything, the super fan, whether it's gaming or professional wrestling, it's one and the same. I have definitely, my eyes have completely cleared. It truly is. And I'm not going to say that every wrestling gamer loves, I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but the crossover is amazing to me, and the passion that just drills down to it. And I think for me, and I wasn't kidding when I introduced myself, the biggest mark, I'm still today the biggest wrestling fan I know. I've probably watched more, I'm older than everybody in here too, but I've probably watched more live wrestling because I was gifted that or blessed with that growing up as a kid, and my dad was a promoter, and then I got on the road, and back when there were a lot more shows, but I've watched a ton of live wrestling, and there's just something about being here, being at a convention, being at a wrestling show, being at a Mania, a SummerSlam, or being at a PAX that creates the synergy, and I hate to use that word because it's almost passé now, but it's the engagement, and so I do think the super fan is one and the same.
Absolutely. And the change forever by the internet is pretty easy to relate to for gaming, right? So it's live ops and launch extensions and how content updates roll. It's feedback, and whether games succeed or fail, it's forever changed by the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of you guys can remember trying to create your favorite wrestler from scratch, and then you remember when all of those forums, remember those forums where you would go and you would get the recipe to make Jeff Jarrett in the game that he wasn't in and things like that, and you had the better looking Jeff Jarrett with the better moveset because you invested all of this time and energy, and now people don't do that anymore because they just download the characters. They know that one person is eventually going to do it, and before the internet we had Game Genie and Game Shark and stuff like that, so we could supercharge all of our favorite wrestlers and stuff, and now it's like impossible to cheat in games, so no one does it anymore. So the internet and internet connectivity changed gaming forever.
And the internet has changed wrestling forever. It's not just how we consume wrestling, it's where we find wrestling, it's how we connect with the personalities, it's everything from the pulse to the top for wrestling.
Yeah, and that's something that I tell guys when I teach seminars, you have no idea how lucky you really are. You don't have to go to a live show. You can sit at home and watch YouTube or Peacock or New Japan World or whatever it may be. And we've sort of hit on this, but just the evolution of gaming, but also the evolution of television, that we went from local TV stations to cable, and from the cable outlets, the way you monetize things were pay-per-view, and then now it's gone to the streaming world. But I'll say this, the internet / digital / social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all that, it's a huge connector, but people can share things, and something can happen in Japan at a show, and we all get to see it within minutes, and that it's just radically, Japan used to be a hidden secret, or Mexico used to be a hidden secret, or a great match in London would take place and you'd have to trade tapes. Now with the connectivity of internet, it's radically changed it for the better.
And we're in the era of indie for both. So if you're finding wrestling or gaming today, indie is absolutely a place to start. So at this point, we only exist because of the success of indies and how we no longer are beholden to major first-party limitations and gatekeepers. Within weeks and a few clicks of a button, you can release globally all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when Super Meat Boy came out, and the Xbox Live Arcade was a thing, and it was like every week, these small little companies were releasing these amazing games that just played completely different from everything else. And it just changed everything, and then it just platformed. I mean, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for some of those games in 2004, 2005 that just changed the scene forever. And now it's created the opportunities for so many more people to get involved in the industry. People that love the industry, people that say, you know what, I like the way that they did it, but I'm going to do it my way. It's an amazing time to get involved, And now you have an opportunity to get involved that you didn't have before.
And this is the era of indie wrestling. If you don't follow indie wrestling, you absolutely have to attend one indie wrestling event to experience it. It's unlike any other wrestling event you've attended.
I agree. You want me to speak on that?
Oh, please do. I think this is some of the most interesting.
And what fascinated me and my partnership with MegaCat is the parallel that I'm not, the gaming expert, believe it or not, but some people do call me the wrestling expert. But the independent scene has exploded. I used to call it kind of the Rock Stone Cold after effect. A lot of kids watched during the cable golden age of cable television in the 90s. Everybody watched wrestling, and then everybody wanted, a lot of guys and girls wanted to become wrestlers. And then 10, 12 years later, they got in and got trained. Well, there wasn't really any platform till YouTube came along. And when YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and all that came along, the independent promotions all over the globe really exploded in such a cool way that it's almost, and I'm from Nashville, so I can relate this to the music businesses as well, that in the 90s, the labels completely ran the show and radio airplay and all that. But now, really, to break out, you got to have your own sound, your own vibe, do your own writing and all that. Well, in wrestling, the same thing. It's almost being the cool, hip guys coming from a promotion like Game Changer Wrestling, based out of, there we go, we got a Game Changer fan over there. We go. But it's got a real cool vibe, and the parallels of the independent gaming world, that's where, pardon my French, that's where the good shit's at. It just is. And that's the cool part about Wrestle Quest and the parallel worlds and just how parallel they are. But it's pretty cool to see all that. But we are definitely in the world of professional wrestling in the age of independent FITE. FITE, it's a streaming service that aggregates literally hundreds. I share a Google spreadsheet with how many independent promotions are just on FITE. And, the different promotions, like I said, when Mexico are all through Europe and Japan, we're all connected. I was on a phone call this morning with India, and there's actually independent wrestling in India, and it's growing massively. So there is independent wrestling literally all over the world. As I understand, the gaming, independent gaming all over the world. But that's what's really cool, that a game like Wrestle Quest and these guys have put on so much work into it, and now we all get to share in their hard work.
And one of the things that was, I'd say, most fulfilling for the team as wrestling fans is as we were getting deeper into Wrestle Quest, and we started looking more at unique regional wrestling and seeing how these different cultural wrestling expansions actually impacted all the wrestling we know and love. So it's not just AAA luchadors, so I very much love them, and there's many luchadors in our game. But it's things like the wrestling from India and wrestling from the UK and Europe and wrestling literally everywhere. So it's something that we very much fed into the creative and the storytelling of Wrestle Quest.
Yeah, there's so Wrestle Quest, again, being a JRPG, there's this huge world map, and many of the towns each represent one of these styles we're talking about. So there's a Lucha Libre town, there's a Japanese strong style town, there's a hardcore wrestling town. So we really wanted to show the gamut of all
BEW.
of that. That's it. Boxwood Extreme Wrestling.
Boxwood Extreme Wrestling.
And you say you're not the video game expert.
Oh, okay.
So we won't spend too much time here, but the wrestling influence extends far beyond traditional wrestling games. So everyone here very much remembers Final Fantasy VI when you suplex the train. If it was up to me, I would have done that as an opener.
Oh, hell yeah.
Pokemon Machamp, you can't collect Pokemon until they start wearing championship belts.
Absolutely. We know Machamp, man. I mean, he's the man. Seismic toss for life,
And Kirby's cute and he's effective, but you have to imagine that suplex didn't come from an instruction manual.
Absolutely. Learned it from somebody.
And we can see this fan ROM hack here for Double Dragon. So one of my first ever games that I played. And we see someone took the wrestler enemy one step further by ROM hacking Hulk Hogan into the front. It's probably under litigation right now.
I know. I wonder if he knows something, brother.
and it goes so far beyond this. This could have been like an entire presentation itself. It's things like Assassin's Creed, Valhalla, and Skyrim, and how wrestling has just influenced every genre and so many games across every era. So this is, I want to say...
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So,
all right.
So it sounds like you know him.
James,
okay.
I got a question. You answer this maybe for this audience. Why the applause? Seriously, dead serious. This is sort of a roundtable group discussion, and I know everybody can't answer at once. Why the applause?
Well, I want to add first, Jeff might be biased because I think he is the kayfabe father of suicide.
I'm not the kayfabe father.
He's a real father.
It was a wild, wild night in L.A. This lady from Midway, no. Just kidding, guys, I'm married.
I'm sure this is not new information for many of you based on the applause, but Suicide was the first ever wrestler created through a video game. And I think Jeff was in the writer's room as he birthed him into the world.
So seriously, why was the applause? They know it's that?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have any Suicide fans in the audience?
That's crazy. Wow. So working with the Midway team, and it was a challenging time, both personally and professionally for me back during that time. But as the deeper and deeper we got into that game and the collaborative effort and the Midway team and the ongoing discussions and Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Chris Daniels, Frankie Kazarian, we had a bunch of gamers on the roster that we wanted them to be engaged in the process. But it was a collaborative effort. But when I kept hearing about this character that they were creating in the game, that it was, only in-game play, I posed the question, is there a possibility, well, first I really asked, who owns that IP? I'm sure that was the first question, but I probably didn't let that out. But I did. I said, like, what's the parameters? Who owns that? Could we make that be a character on Impact? And their eyes lit up, and I knew I had resonated kind of with the room. And I won't go into all the details, but one story after another after a story, and how that became, to life. And I'm not going to point out any fingers, but when it was presented to my creative team and actually to some of the talent, they were a little hesitant. Yes, the name is a little bit rough, and there was a real sensitivity with Spike and just some other conversations and how are we going to license that. And later, as you guys know, we kind of softened all that. But the initial discussions, I just thought it was unbelievably fascinating to have this video game, and how do we, market our game differently, make it different, make it stand out, but also in my business brain is, if we can get one character over, then there's damn sure going to be a sequel, and we can have another game and another game and another game. And so there was, my business brain and my creative brain were really engaged in it. And when it came to life, Universal Studios. Anybody been to Universal Studios and watched TNA taping? I don't know if you did. It kind of had, on some nights, a magical aspect. But the first time, and the Suicide came down on a zip line, and we had rehearsed it a couple of times during the day, and I just knew it was going to get the right reaction. And it was like an overwhelming, everybody in production and the talent and the security guards, everybody was, because it just came to life. So it is definitely my love child, as they titled the slide. But I've got an emotional connection to that just because of the process of it coming to a actual professional wrestler. So it's a very cool, and I'm going to make a text when I step off stage to somebody about that you guys gave it the love. So it's a really, really cool story.
Pat, I know you're a huge Suicide fan. If you want to add a little beat to that.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about the Impact game as we move on, because it's just, from a gaming historian's point of view, it's one of these underlooked games that just had so much more potential. But Suicide is an interesting case because he's such a cool character in the game. But the impact of Suicide on the Impact brand, is unquestioned. Just look at some of the names: Frankie Kazarian, Austin Aries, Christopher Daniels, T.J. Perkins, Caleb Conley, Caleb with a K now, right? And current Ring of Honor champion John Gresham. They've all worn the mask at some point. And this is like John Gresham and Frankie Kazarian, that's like 15 years apart. So the character has endured. There are some amazing wrestlers that only have a lifespan of like 3 or 4 years, and somehow this character that began as a video game character has endured throughout like the history of this promotion. That says something. The shelf life of this character is really cool, and to have the gold around its waist a couple of times, X Division gold. I'm sure you guys remember when Austin Aries he won the title as he won the title, and then he took the mask off and he cashed in with option C. So it's just like, it played a part in several integral storylines. That doesn't happen in other places. This was a huge chance they took. This was innovative, this was different, this was sexy, So it's just like, I'm totally down for something like this, like when people think outside the box. And, a lot of people don't know, but the team that worked on the Impact game, Mark Turmel, he's the creator of NBA Jam. Like they had a killer team in place. They tried to do really cool things, and it transcended from video games into real life. And that goes back to what we've been talking about the entire time, that like video games and wrestling are so one and the same. So Suicide is a perfect example of all of that.
So we're going to start going through some of the rapid-fire categories. I know there's going to be some disputes on the favorite of each platform, so I want to place all that heat on Pat.
Oh my God.
So Pat basically gave each one their own individual title, and we spent a number of weeks discussing this with team members, friends, colleagues. Dozens of Facebook groups and Reddit posts have all culminated into this panel. So I want to start with Wrestlefest. So Wrestlefest for me is actually my number one arcade game.
Yeah. Sure.
And if I think about Wrestlefest, I can still smell the pizza in the pizza shop and I remember those quarters just sinking down. But it's that was my first wrestling video game.
Yeah, Wrestlefest does so many things right, and there's a reason why people still play it to this day. Characters play as authentic to themselves as possible. Trying to like throw around bigger characters just didn't work. It's like they paid attention to small, minute details. They brought out the characteristics of your favorite wrestlers. Why do you guys play wrestling games? Because you want to be these people in one way or another, or even for a short time. You're doing the laundry and you got to load in 15 minutes. Let me throw some suplexes around, blah, 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 And it's just like, even though Wrestlefest was the perfect example, you're in the laundromat. You throw in your quarters in the laundromat. You got 2 quarters left. You run across the street to the arcade and you play a couple of rounds. It's just pick up and play, like even for an arcade game, just to be able to jump in the way that you could and with friends. Oh, so good. Still so good.
And those big sprites that only the arcades made possible at that time were absolutely the draw.
See, and the thing is, a lot of people don't understand this, but like every time you would design an arcade game, it was like designing a brand new game, a brand new console. And sure, like, sometimes they use similar engines and stuff like that, but it's like, imagine creating like a new console every time you make a new game. That's how it was in the 80s. And it wasn't until like companies like Midway and Atari started to really streamline the process and say, oh, we could use the same engine for this and that everything was done from scratch. So the amount of tender love and care in some of these early arcade games is insane. And then, just to touch on some of these other ones, like we talked about tag team wrestling, how influential it was. Konami's Main Event is probably one of the best wrestling games that no one has played.
Do we have any Konami Main Event folks in the audience? I see you, my dude.
You guys could probably go online and watch video of it now, but it's just like, it's one of those games that like, there should have been a sequel. We could have done a panel on wrestling games that should have gotten a sequel. That's definitely one of them. Taito has made some classic arcade shooters over the years. They tried their hand at wrestling. This game also got ported. It got ported for a reason. It was a really good wrestling game. So the arcades, we were pretty blessed with some fun wrestling games.
And they really pushed the entire wrestling gaming space forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So early PC, and some of these are a little more challenging to enjoy.
Yes.
But there's one that I have to bring up.
Yes.
So has anyone here ever played Sergeant Slaughter's Mat Wars?
Maggots!
So it's a bit of I want to say a hidden gem, a little dusty though.
Sure.
So Sergeant Slaughter's Mat Wars is actually one of the first wrestling tycoon games. So very, very good read on the PC audience at that time, and originally released for the Commodore 64. Had some pretty interesting sprite work, and was actually pretty key to a pretty major dispute with Sergeant Slaughter and WWE.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Pat, I think you're a big advocate of micro league wrestling, but I think I arm wrestled you for this slide.
Yeah. The thing about micro league pro wrestling is it's not really a wrestling game. It's there's pictures and there's text. It's like, wow, they made this. This is a wrestling game. Like, and the thing that's crazy to me is like pro wrestling was made a couple of years before this, and pro wrestling has all the elements of a great wrestling game, And on the PC though, somebody in Scranton was like, in Stanford, I'm sorry, I was thinking Dunder Mifflin. I've been watching The Office way too much lately. someone over there was like, oh, let's make a wrestling game, but not actually have any wrestling in it, you know? It's an interesting game. I totally suggest playing it. It's interesting, but it's not really a wrestling game.
I actually had this gifted to me for my first communion. It was such a letdown.
Yeah. Because, I mean, who wants to read when you play video? I'm only kidding. Yeah. But, you know, it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun back in the day.
So 8-bit era, unquestionably pro wrestling.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And the thing is, the impact that pro wrestling had on pro wrestling video games cannot be understated, because how many of you guys have played Fire Pro Wrestling? Okay. The people that haven't played Fire Pro Wrestling, you should. It's the Dark Souls of professional wrestling. You will lose a lot. Thank you. I needed that. You're awesome. But you're not going to be good right away, right? I mean, how many times have you lost in Fire Pro Wrestling? But the thing is, when you start to get good and you start to nail the timing and you start like hitting the moves when you're supposed to, the deep, rich, creative player. I'm a total sucker for New Japan Pro Wrestling and being able to play as Muda and stuff like that. I used to spit like mist in my brother's eyes all the time like that. You know, like it was great. But then they had American, you know, all the American promotions too. So without pro wrestling, because again, the developer Masato Masuda, he left Nintendo after creating pro wrestling, and he joins a company that later becomes Human and is on the original Fire Pro Wrestling team. So he took what he learned, and this happened in video game history all the time. And this is like one of the big problems that I have with video games is you guys will play the games, but you don't know the people that made them. So you'll be like, I love this game and I love this game, and I'm the person I will go, yeah, same people. It's the same DNA, you know. So it's like if you guys pay attention to things like that, you'll have such a greater appreciation for the games that you play. And pro wrestling just laid the groundwork for so many other great wrestling games.
So rocking into handheld, and we decided to consolidate these.
Yeah.
I had to call out Big Bang, which is also was it re-released for Switch?
It was just re-released for Switch. It's I'm pretty sure it's a Neo Geo Pocket wrestling game. Neo Geo Pocket, anyone play it? Anyone have it? 2 buttons. So we're talking like D-pad and, you know, 2 buttons. It's a streamlined, super fun arcade wrestling game. It's like grapples and strikes. It's super fun, super down to earth. All of the characters are parodies of existing like megastars that we love. The story mode is really fun with anime undertones and things like that. It's just something you can totally jump into on a bus or train ride. It's aged extremely well.
I was a big Neo Geo Pocket player. I don't know if we have any Neo Geo fans around here. But I think this game's absolutely worth checking out. Maybe a Intercontinental or something.
Sure, yeah.
So 8-bit imports, we give them their own slide too. We won't spend too much time telling you how much we love Fire Pro as a series, but this specific Fire Pro, which is so important to the future of games.
Yeah.
On the 16-bit era, and this is where I spent most of my childhood hours, was Wrestlemania, the arcade game.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, hell yeah.
Give it up, come on, baby.
So I was lucky enough in my first book, The Minds Behind the Games, to interview Mark Turmel about this entire process. And Midway didn't know. Midway had so much success with fighting games that they were like these larger than life wrestling characters. Why don't we just make a fighting game out of it? You know. And they had so much fun putting this game together. It's not really a wrestling game. It's a fighting game. But they had so many. They had so much fun. But then they had hurdles along the way. Like I'm not sure if you guys know, but Mr. Perfect was supposed to be in the game. And Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, was a classic ribber. And he did not show up from the airport 3 separate times on them. He no-showed them 3 times and wasn't in the game. He thought it was like the funniest thing ever. Then also, several of the wrestlers did not want to perform their mocap because they, again, you're talking 1993, 1994, kayfabe is still a part of the deal. So it wasn't until Sal DeVita, who's like a legendary, you know, game developer that we now know from Mortal Kombat and stuff, he gets in behind the green screen and he starts taking bumps. And some of the wrestlers were like, all right, if this guy's going to take bumps, like, they really care about this game. And they started to really support them. And that's like one of the reasons the wrestlers and the developers really started working close together, and they made something super special that transcends time. It's a lot of fun on the Genesis. I prefer the PS1 version because it's like arcade perfect. It's as close to like that. But what it was able to do on the Genesis, like totally ahead of its time.
I want to disagree only because it's the best on the DOS since the first time I wore the ink off a keyboard.
Nice. Nice.
So PS1 era, WCW versus NWO. Can we get some love for this?
So how many of you guys have not played WCW versus NWO? Okay, the door's right there. All right, so let me ask another question. How many of you guys love the Nintendo 64 wrestling games? Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story. So there was a producer at THQ by the name of Sanders Keel, and he was looking at like some really cool Japanese games to bring to the United States, and he comes across this wrestling game that was being made by a company called The Man Breeze, which is like the worst name for a company.
Not too bad.
And it would later be changed to Asmic Ace, and then it would later be changed to Aki. So we all know Aki. So what happens is Sanders contacts like his coworkers, his senior workers at THQ, and he's like, listen, if we took this wrestling game and we put a WCW coat of paint on it, because Sting was huge at this point. They're like, we put Sting on the cover of this game, and we put WCW characters in it, we can have a hit. It controls different from other wrestling games. It is something really special. And it's funny because Jeff Jarrett is in that game too, and he's awesome in that game.
I'm good in the Midway game too, pal.
Yeah. So what happens is that game comes out and it sells well. It sells over 1 million copies. But what happens is Aki goes, you know, we are never developing on the PlayStation ever again. We do not want to work on the PlayStation. So THQ and Sanders Keel are like, you know what? Let's move to the Nintendo 64. So if it wasn't for Aki saying, you know, we're done with the PlayStation, you would have never had those amazing Nintendo 64 games that you love. And if it wasn't for WCW vs. the World, you would have never had those games. So this is like a game that like every wrestling fan should own. You should own it, no doubt.
There we go.
Wrestlemania 2000, easily beloved. I don't think this one's a surprise. Great 4-player, which is usually what N64 did for many of us growing up.
Yeah.
5th generation imports. I think Pat still has several on his person right now. So it's a must play if
The
you're
English modded version.
It's a must play if you're a fan of the N64 and wrestling.
Absolutely.
For Xbox, we went with Raw, and this is majorly contested in a few different Facebook groups that I've been banned from.
Yeah, there's a ton of glitches in Raw too. I hate to say it, but like these games look great when they came out. They were Xbox exclusives.
You better watch what you're saying right now.
I know.
That's it.
I know. But they were cool. And this was the time when you had different wrestling games on the GameCube, Xbox, and PlayStation at the same time. Super fun time for pro wrestling games.
So PS2, we're going to go with Here Comes the Pain.
I think the crowd is spoken. Absolutely.
I felt Suicide just ducked down a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, big time.
For GameCube, we went with Ultimate Muscle. We have any Ultimate Muscle players here? Oh, baby.
I mean, the reason why is because X8, everyone was expecting No Mercy on the GameCube, and X8 was absolutely not No Mercy. Ultimate Muscle is an Aki game. It controls very similarly to No Mercy, and I mean that. You guys are familiar with that IP. It's so much fun. Saturday morning cartoons, weird, wacky characters. Let's do it.
So 7th generation champion, TNA Impact.
Here we go. Here we go.
Jeff, if I recall, you were almost impossible to beat in that game. Did you have a role in that?
I played the 5th. I actually didn't. That was all they're doing. That was completely all they're doing. But
They wanted to make it true to life.
there we go. I was going to say. Thank you. Just listen to Zach here.
So modern era PS5, PS4, Xbox One X. We left this one scheduled for one fall.
Scheduled for one fall.
So we have a lot happening right now. We're really excited for the new AEW game. I can't wait to see what it brings back for the juice. And I think that even 2K22 was pretty good. You know, it was good to see some improvements and a little more fan service than we'd expected the last several installments.
Yeah, competition is
We
everything.
won't spend too much time here because we have a few minutes for questions. We have some other notables. This will be on our website if anyone wants to argue with me. Super reliable via email. And then Indies. One of our good friends, Mike Herman, out of Philadelphia, Wrestlemania. If you guys haven't played it, it's worth picking up. It's a great game. 10 years of development, by the way. It's something he doesn't often talk about. So massive passion project, tons of effort. And now I'd love to fit in some questions. We have a few minutes left.
There's a mic right there, brother.
Yeah, right in the middle. The red. Yes, sir. Go right up there. Give us your best Mean Gene. Where are you from?
I'm from Skokie, Illinois, but I currently live in Somerville, Massachusetts.
Right on. What's your name?
My name's Jay.
Jay.
My question, specifically for Wrestle Quest, you guys have all these likenesses of these big names from the 80s and even maybe even some current ones. A lot of the stuff that we've been hearing with regards to wrestlers nowadays is just a lot of legal things with the likenesses. So I was wondering, how complicated was the process of getting all their likenesses, considering they've like established them in various brands and territories over the years?
Yeah, 3 lawyers and 2 publishers later, we figured it out.
Nice.
I'm happy to dive deeper at the booth. Come down, we'll have plenty to talk about.
Boy, you ain't kidding. It's the first question I asked when we looked up. No. Incredible, though.
Whoa, damn, all right. Hey, man, I'm CB from Brooklyn, New York. Now
Yeah, Brooklyn, baby. Who else is from Brooklyn?
you know how I feel. Hey. Also, Watertown, Massachusetts now, so that's, for everyone that lives there, awesome. If you don't, still awesome. How do I buy this game, Wrestle Quest?
It's coming out later this year.
All right, how fast can I give you my money? Like, how do you
If you come down to the booth, we'll give you the closest thing to owning it. I also have a wrestler there that's willing to go collar and elbow if you really want to get tied up.
Let's do it.
All right. And last thing, you guys are just barrels of knowledge of wrestling. So have you ever heard of a game called Saturday Night Slam Masters?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, baby.
Okay. I'm curious to know what you think about that game.
So I think Saturday Night
It doesn't matter what you think about that game.
Speaking of, we should have given that a spot, actually.
Yeah. It was
You
on the list
have
and
to
we
be
took it
from
off.
Brooklyn. Yeah, get out of here, you asshole.
What's funny about Slam Masters?
He's not gonna get
We
the
had a whole
last laugh.
slide dedicated to this because it's almost a category. Like brawlers and beat 'em ups with wrestling are really closely married.
Guys, we had about 95 games on this list. No exaggeration. Well, while we were putting this panel together, so it's crazy. Yeah, we love that. That's a great game.
Hey, what's good, guys? My name is Alberto from New Jersey. I was just wondering, with the GameCube section, you guys left out Day of Reckoning. I feel like that was like a real big game for the time.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's probably the best WWE game on the GameCube. It's just we didn't want to make it too WWE oriented too. There are other promotions or other, So that's why we put what's it called, Wrestlemania X8 to represent that series of games. So yeah, Day of Reckoning, definitely probably one of the stronger ones. Def Jam Vendetta, that's a story for another day. If you guys come to the booth, I will tell you the behind-the-scenes story of Def Jam Vendetta. It's actually in my next book and how it started off as a WCW game. So come on down and I can tell you that story. Sure.
And I just want to thank Jeff Jarrett for coming. Appreciate the insight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, great stuff. That was wonderful. I don't know how to word it into a question, but you're talking about all the games that have been coming out all these years, and they all tell different kinds of wrestling stories, but they all had a basic flow to them, which is to just be kind of a way to translate wrestling into a type of fighting game. And so the thing I've always wanted, as I've gotten older, the wrestling wasn't just like, that's my favorite guy, I want him to win. It was, I wanted to tell the story of who it was. And sometimes that story is losses. Sometimes that story is, to Jeff's point about Shakespeare, is tragedy.
Sure.
And that's something I haven't been able to find in any of these games. I don't have a real question here, more that there's more games to be made, there's more to come, because nothing delivers that to me yet, and I'm waiting for something like that.
You know what? Before Zach comments, because he's the one to comment, you said the fancy sauce. It's candidly not about winning and losing in wrestling. It's about the journey, not the destination, pal. So I'm going to let him talk to it, because Wrestle Quest freaking nails it.
Yeah, if you're looking for that story, then it's absolutely Wrestle Quest. There's a large playable cast. There's 12 playable characters, and we explore everything from the desire to be a champion to sort of like the behind the scenes, the effort and blood, sweat, and tears that go into it, and what you sacrifice to become the champion. And at the end of the day, is it worth it? What's being away from my family and the pain and being on the road and everything, was that all worth it? So we explore every element. So I think if that's what you're looking for, definitely give WrestleQuest a try.
Thank you very much.
Great comment. Thank you.
Great question, man.
Get on my tippy toes here. I'm Joe from Binghamton, New York.
Joe, I think we're at time. You have to go really quick, bro.
I'm going really quick. All right. So a big part of wrestling games for me is storyline. What do you think is more important, gameplay or action or storyline?
Well, this is all day long, Jeff Jarrett.
At the end of the day, he just meant on it that no matter what character, we can go through 1,000 of them, but we always remember in wrestling the story, and that it's a necessary evil, but not really. You got to have the gameplay and all the fancy moves, and there's a crowd meter and all that kind of stuff. But the story and the journey, that's what creates the emotional connection to any form of entertainment. And these guys with Wrestle Quest, when I tell you they nailed the storyline to get emotionally connected from Randy Santos, and you see him evolve into the champion Muchacho Man, you're going to jump out of your seat when you do it.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, boys.
I hope we talk again. Please send the hate mail to Pat. Yep.
Also, too, if you guys want to meet us at the booth later to check out the game.
Yeah, come down to the booth. The two guys.
I have
that
some
did-
Wrestle Quest cards over here. If you guys want more information, I'll hand them out to you guys after. Some
Yeah.
bookmarks and stuff. So
The two
so
guys that didn't
everyone
get the
stays in
question,
contact.
come to the booth.